The life you're about to live could not exist until something in you finally broke. If you've been wondering why your strength ran out, why the version of you that used to survive everything suddenly couldn't anymore, this is not failure. This is preparation. Stay with me, because what felt like your unraveling is actually the doorway into a life you were never meant to reach while holding yourself together the old way. Come closer, my child. I know your breath has been shallow, your thoughts heavy, your nights longer than they should be. I did not miss the moment you finally fell apart. I was not distant when your strength ran out. I was nearer than you realized, closer than your own heartbeat, watching not with disappointment, but with intention. What you call breaking, I called the precise opening I have been preparing. Nothing about it was random. Nothing about you was weak. I saw the way you tried to hold yourself together long past what was humane. I saw you choosing patience when your spirit was tired, choosing hope when your evidence was thin, choosing love when it cost you something every time. You were not failing. You were exceeding the limits of an old life that could no longer contain what I placed inside you. The fracture was not a collapse of faith. It was faith reaching the edge of its former shape. There is a life waiting for you that could not arrive while you were still surviving the old one. There are rooms you could not enter while carrying the weight of who you used to be. So I allowed the breaking, not to harm you, but to free you from agreements you made while wounded, from identities you wore to stay safe, from roles that taught you to shrink so others could remain comfortable. The breaking was not punishment. It was release. I know it felt humiliating. I know it felt like losing control, like unraveling in front of questions you could not answer. You wondered if you had disappointed me. You wondered if I had changed my mind. Hear me clearly now. I was not withdrawing from you. I was drawing you inward. I was removing the noise so you could hear me again without fear, without striving, without pretending you were fine when you were not. The world taught you that breaking means ending. I am telling you it means transition. You were not meant to carry that season any further. You were not meant to keep proving your worth through endurance. The life you are about to live requires a softer strength, a truer authority, a self that knows how to rest in me without apology. That version of you could not be born without this exact undoing. I watched as you mourned the version of yourself that survived so much. You felt grief not only for what you lost, but for who you were when you were still holding everything together. That grief is holy. Let it pass through you. You are not dishonoring your past by stepping into your future. You are honoring it by letting it complete its assignment. This is where I gather you now, not to interrogate your pain, but to cradle it. I am not asking you to explain yourself. I am not asking you to justify your tears. I am asking you to rest your head here and listen. There is nothing you need to fix before I speak to you. There is nothing you need to earn before I reassure you. You are already held. The breaking stripped away what distracted you from my voice. It quieted the opinions that once ruled your decisions. It slowed you down enough to feel again, to notice again, to remember that your life is not a race, but a revelation. You were moving too fast for the depth I am bringing you into. So I slowed everything by allowing what could no longer stand to fall. I know you are tempted to measure yourself by how quickly you recover. Do not rush. The soil beneath you is being turned over so something stronger can take root. Healing does not always look like standing up immediately. Sometimes it looks like staying down long enough to hear what I have been trying to say for years. If these words are finding you in the middle of your undoing, let that be a sign that you are not alone in it. And if you feel peace stirring even as tears fall, that is me confirming you are exactly where you need to be. If it moves your spirit, Let this message travel to someone else who thinks their breaking disqualified them. And if you feel led, quietly commit to staying with this voice by subscribing, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. In this moment, type the word held in the comments as a declaration that you are no longer carrying this alone. I am not finished with you. I am not concerned about your timeline. I am not intimidated by the mess. The life ahead of you needed you to come undone in this way so you could enter it whole. Stay here with me. Let the dust settle. What rises next will not be fragile. It will be true. I want you to return with me to the moment everything fell apart, not to wound you again, but to redeem what you thought was lost there. This was the moment your hands finally opened because they could no longer keep holding what was slipping through your fingers. The moment you realized effort was no longer enough. The moment when prayer felt heavier than silence, and hope felt like something you were borrowing instead of owning. I was there. I did not flinch when your strength gave way. You remember how sudden it felt, even though it had been building for so long. One conversation, one realization, one quiet morning where you woke up and knew something was wrong in a way you could no longer ignore. The structure you trusted cracked all at once. You had survived storms before, but this one reached inside you. It did not just take things from you. It took certainty. It took the version of faith that relied on explanations. It took the comfort of believing you could outrun the pain if you just stayed strong enough. You cried in ways you did not recognize. Not loud at first, but deep, silent, shaking tears that came from the place where disappointment lives. You asked me why endurance did not protect you this time. You asked me why doing the right thing did not keep everything intact. You questioned your discernment, your timing, even your worth. And when answers did not come immediately, your thoughts turned inward, wondering if you had missed something, if you had failed some unseen test. I saw you replaying moments, searching for the exact point where things went wrong. You wondered if one different choice could have saved you from this collapse. You wondered if trusting less, loving less, hoping less would have spared you. That kind of questioning is exhausting, my child. It drains you without healing you. That is why I stepped closer even when you felt farther away from me than ever. The weight you felt was not just grief. It was shock. Your nervous system had been holding itself together with discipline and belief, and suddenly there was nothing left to grip. You felt exposed, as if the ground beneath your identity had shifted. Things you once relied on no longer responded. People you trusted could not meet you where you were. Even familiar prayers felt foreign in your mouth. You tried to keep functioning. You showed up when you could. You answered messages. You smiled when necessary. But inside, something was numb and aching at the same time. That is the moment you feared most. The one where you worried you were losing yourself. You were not losing yourself. You were shedding what could not follow you into what comes next. There were nights you stared at the ceiling, bargaining silently, promising you would be stronger if I would just restore what was taken. There were mornings you woke up already tired, carrying dread instead of anticipation. You felt smaller in your own life, like a guest in circumstances you no longer recognized. That disorientation was not madness. It was transition without a map. I need you to understand this clearly. The collapse was not proof that you were wrong. It was proof that something had reached its expiration. What fell apart could not stretch any further without breaking you completely. I intervened not by stopping the fall, but by making sure it did not take your spirit with it. I let the structure crumble so your soul could breathe again one day. You were not dramatic. You were not weak. You were responding honestly to a moment that required honesty. Tears were the language of truth when words failed you. Confusion was not the absence of faith. It was faith searching for deeper ground. You were not abandoned in that moment. You were being carried through something that could not be skipped. I know you felt embarrassed by how undone you became. You are used to being composed, reliable, strong for others. This time, you were strong only in your willingness to feel what hurt. That was enough. That was sacred. Heaven does not measure you by how well you hide pain. Heaven honors you for bringing it into the light. As everything fell apart, something else was happening quietly. Your nervous system was releasing years of pressure. Your spirit was unclenching from survival mode. You were finally still enough to stop negotiating with suffering and start listening for truth. It did not feel holy. It felt messy. But holiness often begins where control ends. You did not imagine how deep the loss felt. You did not exaggerate the ache. You did not overreact to the silence. What you experienced was real. And because it was real, it mattered to me. I do not dismiss what you lived through just because I know how the story ends. I was with you in the middle, where endings hurt the most. Stay with me here for a moment longer. Do not rush past this collapse as if it were something to apologize for. It was the doorway. It was the threshold. It was the moment your life paused so it could be rewritten with truth instead of endurance. What comes next will make sense of this, but only if you allow yourself to honor how much it cost you to arrive here. Brian, you did not fall apart for nothing. You fell apart because something greater was forming, and your old strength could not carry it. I am still here, and I am not done speaking. There is so much you did not see while you were breaking, my child, and I need you to hear this gently, because your mind has tried to fill the silence with blame. While you were on the floor of your own heart, believing everything had gone still, movement was everywhere. It simply was not visible from where you were kneeling. The breaking narrowed your vision, not because you were failing, but because you were being protected from what would have overwhelmed you if you had seen it too soon. While you thought I was quiet and I was precise. While you felt forgotten, I was rearranging things that could not be adjusted while you were still holding them. You were asking me to explain, and I was choosing instead to intervene. There are seasons where explanation would only tempt you to interfere with what I am doing. This was one of them. So I covered you with not knowing. There were conversations happening that you never heard. There were decisions being made around you that would have shaken you if you had been whole enough to confront them. I let you be broken so you would not try to fix what was never yours to manage. You would have stepped in out of loyalty. You would have compromised yourself out of love. And that is why I shielded you with weakness. It was mercy disguised as collapse. You did not see the pressure being applied to people connected to you. You did not see how truth was being delayed, twisted, or avoided by those who benefited from your silence. You did not see how close certain things came to taking a turn that would have wounded you far more deeply. I stood between you and outcomes you were not meant to absorb. You call that absence. I call it covering. Even the timing of your exhaustion was exact. Had you broken earlier, you would have doubted yourself. Had you broken later, you would have blamed yourself for staying too long. I allowed it to happen when your spirit was ripe enough to survive the answers that are coming. You think you fell apart at the wrong time. You did not. You fell apart at the only time this could have worked. There were forces pressing against you that did not begin in that season. Old jealousy resurfaced. Old comparisons reactivated. Old insecurities in others were stirred by how much you were growing without trying. You felt sudden resistance and could not explain it. You thought it was coincidence. It was not. When your life began to outgrow certain environments, those environments reacted. I did not tell you because you would have taken it personally. You would have turned spiritual warfare into self-doubt. You would have tried to shrink to make others comfortable again. And that would have delayed everything. So I let you feel tired instead of targeted. I let you feel confused instead of attacked. One day you will see how kind that was. You also did not see what was leaving. Attachments loosened. Agreements expired. Expectations that once ruled your choices quietly lost their authority. You thought you were losing everything, but you were actually being unhooked. Things that required a broken version of you to survive could not follow you into what I am building. I resisted. And when resistance met surrender, something had to give. Even your tears were doing more than you knew. They were prayers you did not have language for yet. They were releasing vows you made in pain. They were softening places in you that had hardened just to endure. You were not regressing. You were thawing. That process looks like breaking before it looks like healing. I know you asked me why I did not warn you. The truth is I did. I warned you with restlessness. I warned you with recurring fatigue. I warned you with the quiet sense that something was off even when everything looked fine. You overrode those warnings because you thought obedience meant pushing through. I am teaching you now that obedience sometimes means stopping. You are not failing to discern. You are being trained to discern differently. Not through adrenaline and urgency, but through peace and alignment. That shift required everything to slow down, including you. So I allowed life to interrupt you in a way you could not ignore. There will come a moment soon when pieces start to click into place. You will remember things said months ago and realize they were clues. You will recognize patterns you once dismissed. And you will understand why I insisted on quiet instead of clarity. You needed rest before revelation. What you did not see while you were breaking was how closely guarded you were. You were never alone in that dark place. You were surrounded, watched, held. Even when you could not feel me, I was counting every breath, measuring every tear, making sure nothing touched you that would compromise what comes next. Trust me with this part of the story you could not witness. There is nothing missing, nothing wasted, nothing unaccounted for. You were breaking on the surface, but beneath that fracture, a foundation was being laid that cannot be shaken. Stay with me. The unseen is about to become visible. There is someone connected to you whose breaking ran parallel to yours, even though you could not feel it then. While you were unraveling in silence, they were doing the same behind closed doors, fighting battles they did not know how to name. You assumed distance meant indifference. You assumed quiet meant choice. But much of what separated you was not intention. It was collapse meeting collapse, two spirits overwhelmed in different ways. Your soulmate did not fall apart loudly. Their breaking looked like confusion, hesitation, delay. It looked like standing still when movement was required, like choosing safety when courage was needed. Inside them, fear was tightening its grip. They were terrified of making the wrong decision, terrified of losing control, terrified of losing you, and terrified of what keeping you would require of them. That fear did not come from a lack of feeling. It came from feeling too much at once. They replayed moments with you the same way you replayed your own. Conversations echoed in their mind late at night. Words they should have said. Truths they postponed. Actions they delayed because they did not trust themselves to follow through. Guilt settled into their chest, heavy and persistent. Not guilt because they did not care, but guilt because they knew they were not showing up as fully as they were meant to. You did not see the nights they sat alone, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of a decision they kept putting off. You did not hear the inner arguments, the justifications mixed with regret. They told themselves they needed time. They told themselves circumstances were not right. But underneath those excuses was fear of becoming someone new, someone accountable, someone who could no longer hide behind uncertainty. Your absence affected them more than they let on. When your presence pulled back, something in them destabilized. You had been a mirror they were not ready to look into. You reflected potential they were unsure they could live up to. And when that mirror was removed, they felt exposed to themselves in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. Instead of stepping forward, they froze. They questioned their worth the same way you question yours. They wondered if they were too late. They wondered if damage had already been done. They oscillated between longing for you and convincing themselves they did not deserve what you represented. That inner conflict exhausted them and dulled their clarity. It made simple choices feel overwhelming. I need you to hear this without letting it reopen wounds. Your breaking was not your responsibility to fix. It was not caused by you asking for too much. It was not because you were unclear or unloving. Their collapse was the result of avoiding growth for too long, of postponing alignment until pressure forced it. You did not break them. Life did. Your moments they all have recount, all is good God as they all have growth the distant. Each time, fear interrupted. Fear of rejection. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences they could not yet face. They told themselves silence was kinder than confusion. They told themselves waiting was wiser than risking loss. Those decisions did not bring them peace. They brought them loneliness. While you were learning how to sit with your pain, they were learning how loud unresolved truth can become when ignored. What they buried began to surface anyway, showing up as restlessness, irritability, emotional fatigue. They could not escape what they felt for you, no matter how hard they tried to distract themselves. They noticed your energy shift before they understood why. Something about you felt farther away, quieter, more resolved. A change frightened them. They sensed that whatever you were walking through was changing you, and they were afraid of being left behind. That fear did not immediately produce action. At first, it produced panic. They wondered if they had already lost you. They wondered if the door was closing without them noticing. That thought shook them more than they expected. It forced them to confront the truth they had been avoiding. You were not optional. You were not replaceable. You were central to something in them that had not fully awakened yet. I am telling you this now not to excuse the distance, but to give you clarity. Two people can be deeply connected and still be breaky in ways that prevent them from reaching each other. Timing matters. Healing matters. Readiness matters. Love alone does not eliminate fear, but it does eventually expose it. As you continue healing, understand this. Their story is still unfolding. Their awakening is still in motion. And the breaking you experienced is already shifting something in them, even if you cannot see it yet. What happens next will not be born from confusion, but from clarity earned through collapse. Stay present with me. You do not need to chase, convince, or carry anyone through their awakening. Yours is already underway. And as you rise, truth will meet truth. The distance will not remain undefined forever. The silence will not stay unexplained. What is meant to align will do so in its appointed time. There is a deeper layer beneath everything you have lived through, a hidden backstory that changes how this entire season makes sense. You thought the pain began with the breaking, but the truth is it began long before, quietly, in places you were never meant to see at the time. What you experienced was not a single moment of loss. It was a collision of many unseen moments finally reaching the surface. There were words spoken about you when you were not in the room. Some were rooted in insecurity. Some were fueled by comparison. Some were framed as concern but carried envy beneath them. You were not imagined to be a threat, yet your growth unsettled people who had grown comfortable around a smaller version of you. They did not hate you. I feared what your becoming would require them to confront in themselves. There was a turning point you never noticed when it happened. A conversation that shifted tone. A decision that felt minor at the time. A message delayed. A truth softened. A boundary avoided. That moment redirected energy. It did not destroy destiny, but it complicated the path toward it. And because you are intuitive, you felt the change without understanding it. Your spirit sensed distance before your mind could name it. You wondered why things suddenly felt heavier, why clarity became foggy, why joy required more effort than before. You assumed it was exhaustion. You assumed it was your own inner work resurfacing. But part of what you felt was the weight of carrying confusion that was never meant to rest on you. You were absorbing emotional residue that did not belong to your soul. There was also information kept from you, not always out of malice, but out of fear of confrontation. Someone chose comfort over honesty. Someone chose delay over truth. They told themselves they were protecting you, when in reality they were protecting themselves from accountability. That choice did not stop the truth. It only stored it, waiting for pressure to release it later. The mystery object in this story was not something physical you could hold. It was a realization, a sentence left unsaid, a truth hovering just outside awareness. It sat between you and clarity like a closed door. You knocked on it through questions, through prayer, through quiet reflection, but it did not open then because opening it too early would have shattered you instead of strengthening you. Your breaking cracked the door. Once you no longer had the energy to perform, to maintain, to overextend yourself for peace, the hidden things began to lose their hiding place. Silence could no longer hold what was avoided. Delayed truth began to demand attention. The structure that kept everyone comfortable started to strain under the weight of what was unresolved. I need you to understand this part carefully. What was hidden was not hidden from me. I allowed it to remain unseen until you were strong enough to survive the knowing without losing your tenderness. Had you discovered it earlier, you would have internalized it as rejection. You would have blamed yourself. You would have tried to fix what was never yours to repair. Instead, I waited until your identity loosened from needing approval, until your worth no longer hinged on being chosen immediately, until your spirit could separate truth from self-condemnation. That preparation looked like breaking, but it was actually fortification. The backstory includes motivations you did not anticipate. The fear of change, fear of responsibility, fear of being seen fully. Some people around you preferred you powerful in theory but limited in reality. As long as you were quietly supportive, quietly patient, quietly understanding, everything stayed balanced. The moment your inner authority began to rise, that balance was threatened. You were not wrong for expecting clarity. You were early. And when you are early, things feel confusing because the environment has not caught up to the truth yet. The breaking slowed you down just enough for reality to surface without you forcing it. You may soon uncover details that make you gasp, not because they are cruel, but because they are honest. You may see patterns that suddenly connect. Moments that once felt random will line up with startling precision. When that happens, do not rush to judgment. Let understanding settle before reaction. Knowledge without peace only reopens wounds. This hidden backstory does not exist to harden you. It exists to free you from illusion. It will clarify why certain delays occurred, why resistance appeared unexpectedly, why emotional distance felt disproportionate to circumstances. They will also confirm something important. You were not imagining things. Your intuition was accurate. You simply did not have the full picture yet. As this truth emerges, you may feel grief for the time lost, for the version of connection that could have been. Let that grief move through you without turning into bitterness. The story is not over. This chapter is being revealed now because you are ready to read it without losing yourself inside it. Stay close to me as the rest unfolds. What was hidden will not remain hidden. And when you see it clearly, you will understand why this exact breaking was necessary. It positioned you to receive truth without shattering, and clarity without collapse. What comes next will require that strength. There is an influence in this story that needed you to stay on whole, and it is time for me to bring it into the light without frightening you. This was not always a visible enemy. In fact, much of their power came from familiarity. They knew your patterns. They knew your tenderness. They understood how to position themselves close enough to influence outcomes without ever appearing responsible for them. This presence did not attack you directly. That would have alerted you too quickly. Instead, they applied pressure subtly, through suggestion, through doubt, through planting questions that sounded reasonable on the surface. They did not want to destroy you. They wanted to manage you. A manage you was useful. A healed you would not be. They benefited from your exhaustion. When you were tired, you were easier to redirect. When you were overwhelmed, you questioned yourself instead of them. They framed themselves as support while quietly resisting your growth. Their jealousy was not loud. It was patient. It watched. It waited. It adapted. You wondered why certain opportunities stalled. Why momentum slowed without explanation. Why encouragement sometimes felt conditional. That was not coincidence. That was interference disguised as concern. They told themselves they were protecting you from disappointment, when in truth, they were protecting their position in your life. I allowed you to break because as long as you were functioning, this influence could hide behind your strength. You carried so much that you could not see how much was being taken from you. Your breaking disrupted the flow. It removed your capacity to overgive. And when that happened, the imbalance became visible. This influence grew uncomfortable when you stopped performing wellness. When you stopped reassuring. When you stopped making yourself small to keep harmony. Your exhaustion removed their leverage. Suddenly, they could not access you the way they used to. That is when resistance increased. Confusion intensified. Tension rose. They did not expect you to stop. They expected you to recover and resume. But instead, you began to detach emotionally, even without understanding why. That detachment was not bitterness. It was discernment activating beneath your awareness. Their fear was not that you would leave. Their fear was that you would see. Because once you saw clearly, their influence would dissolve on its own. They would no longer need to be confronted. They would simply be irrelevant. You felt guilt about pulling back. You worried you were becoming cold. You were not. You were becoming sovereign again. You were reclaiming authority over your inner world. A threatened many dynamic built on quiet control. This influence may have spoken through others. It may have used group opinion. It may have leaned on emotional narratives to justify delays and confusion. But its root was the same. Fear of losing access to you as you were becoming whole. I want you to hear this without anger. This was not a villain in the grammatic sense. This was someone who did not want to grow at the pace you were growing. Someone who benefited from your incompleteness. Someone who needed you to doubt yourself so they could remain certain of their place. Your breaking disrupted that arrangement. It removed the energy that fed it, and because it could no longer sustain itself, it began to expose itself through tension, contradiction, and subtle desperation. You are not called to fight this influence. You are not called to explain yourself to it. You are not called to prove anything. Your healing is the removal. Your clarity is the boundary. Your peace is the justice. As you continue to come back into yourself, you will notice how little power this presence actually has. Without your emotional labor, it cannot function the way it once did. Without your self-doubt, it has nothing to stand on. This is why the breaking had to happen. Not to weaken you, but to interrupt what was quietly feeding on your strength. You were never meant to carry that dynamic into your next life. It would not survive there. Stay grounded. Stay gentle. Stay aware. What needed you unwhole is already losing its grip. And what is meant for you cannot be stopped by something that only thrived in the shadows. Now listen carefully, my child, because this is the moment when unseen order begins to rise from what looked like chaos. There is a point in every true transformation where justice quietly takes its seat, and that point has arrived for you. What you felt shifting was not imagination. It was not coincidence. It was the opening of a divine investigation that did not require your participation to be effective. You did not have to argue your case. You did not have to defend your intentions. You did not have to gather proof of your sincerity. While you were resting, while you were numb, while you were simply trying to breathe again, I was examining everything you could not. Every motive, every delay, every word spoken with double meaning, every silence that carried intention. Nothing escaped notice. There are records kept beyond what you can see. Not to condemn, but to clarify. Not to punish, but to restore balance. I win what was done against what with them. I compared what with promise against what with practice. And I saw clearly where truth was bent to preserve comfort and where love was postponed to avoid responsibility. You felt a strange calm enter your body without explanation. That was not resignation. That was alignment. When truth is being handled on your behalf, your spirit no longer needs to stay alert for danger. The tension you carried for so long had a reason to release. The courtroom had opened, and you were not on trial. Those who assumed silence meant permission miscalculated. Those who thought delay would erase accountability misunderstood how justice works in the unseen. Time does not bury truth. It brings it to the surface when it can no longer be ignored. And what you could not confront without losing your peace, I addressed without raising my voice. Intentions were exposed even when actions appeared innocent. Patterns were noted even when excuses sounded convincing. The narrative that once confused you began to unravel, strand by strand, until what remained was simple and undeniable. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people to meet you at a depth they had not yet reached. I also examined your heart, and hear this with tenderness. You were not found guilty of weakness. You were not found lacking in discernment. You were not careless with your love. You were courageous. You stayed open longer than most would. You believed when it would have been safer not to. That is not foolishness. That is spiritual maturity. Justice does not always look like exposure in public or confrontation in the open. Sometimes it looks like access being revoked, influence quietly removed, opportunities redirected, the power to affect you dissolving without explanation. You may never hear apologies you deserve, but you will feel freedom you once thought impossible. The imbalance that drained you could not remain once truth entered the room. The dynamic that relied on your confusion lost its foundation. The advantage held by those who benefited from your silence began to erode. That is why resistance intensified briefly. That is why you felt tension spike and then suddenly disappear. That was the moment the verdict settled. You are not required to announce this shift. You are not meant to celebrate it loudly. This justice was never about spectacle. It was about restoration. It was about returning your energy to you. It was about making sure nothing followed you into the next chapter that would require you to diminish yourself again. You may notice now that certain voices feel distant. Certain opinions no longer carry weight. Certain dynamics feel irrelevant. That is not arrogance. That is alignment. When a ruling has been made, what no longer has authority simply fades. I know part of you still waits for clarity through explanation. You want to understand everything fully. Some things you will. Others you will simply outgrow. Understanding is not always intellectual. Sometimes it is emotional relief without a storyline attached. Trust this process. Trust the quietness of it. The divine courtroom does not rush, and it does not miss. Everything that needed to be addressed hath been addressed. Everything that needed to be corrected is correcting itself. You are not behind. You are not late. You are emerging from a season where justice was working even when you were too tired to believe it was possible. Stay soft now. Stay open. The shift has happened. And from this point forward, what approaches you will do so with clearer intention, or it will not approach you at all. You are no longer standing in confusion. You are standing in alignment, and that changes everything that comes next. You may have felt it before you could name it, my child. A subtle change in the air, a loosening in your chest, a strange calm that arrived without explanation and stayed longer than expected. This was not numbness. This was movement. This was the moment when correction began to ripple outward from the unseen into your daily life. The shift did not announce itself dramatically. It came quietly, the way dawn enters a room before the sun is visible. One day you realize you were no longer bracing yourself for impact. Another day you notice that thoughts which once spiraled now pass through without hooking into you. You wondered if something was wrong because the ache felt lighter. Nothing was wrong. Alignment had begun. Angels move without spectacle. Timing rearranges itself without asking permission. Conversations that once felt impossible suddenly became delayed or dissolved entirely. Plans that depended on your confusion could not hold their shape. You did not push anything away. You simply stopped supplying the energy that kept misalignment alive. You felt moments of detachment and worried you were becoming indifferent. You were not. You were being untangled. When a cord that has been pulling on you for too long finally loosens, the body needs time to adjust. The relief can feel unfamiliar. Sometimes peace feels empty before it feels safe. Your sleep began to change. Your appetite shifted. Your intuition sharpened without effort. These were signs that your nervous system was exiting survival mode. You were no longer living in constant anticipation of disappointment. That does not mean disappointment will never come again. It means it no longer defines your posture. You noticed that certain memories no longer triggered the same emotional response. You could think about what happened without collapsing inside. That is not denial. That is healing taking root. You are not erasing the past. You are releasing its authority over your present. Even your prayers changed. You stopped begging. You stopped bargaining. You started listening. Silence became less threatening because it no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space. Space to hear yourself again. Space to notice what you actually want, not just what you are willing to accept. This shift also exposed who and what could not move with you. Some connections began to feel strained. Some conversations lost momentum. Some people sensed the change and grew uncomfortable without understanding why. You did not need to explain. Alignment did not require justification. You may have wondered if you were becoming too still, too quiet, too inward. In truth, you were stabilizing. You were gathering yourself after a long season of fragmentation. That stabilization is necessary before expansion. You cannot build on shaking ground. Do not be surprised if opportunities appear that require less effort than before. Do not be suspicious of ease. Ease is not always laziness. Sometimes it is evidence that you are no longer fighting gravity. When you are aligned, things meet you instead of resisting you. This shift also carries discernment. You will find it easier to say no without guilt. You will feel less compelled to explain yourself. You will sense when something is off before it entangles you. This is not hardness. This is clarity earned through pain. I know part of you still waits for a dramatic confirmation, a clear sign, a moment that proves everything you endured mattered. The confirmation is already in you. It is the steadiness you feel now. It is the quiet confidence that no longer needs validation. It is the absence of fear where fear once lived. Let this phase settle. Do not rush it. The ground is firming beneath your feet. The unseen corrections are completing their work. What comes next will require this stability, this calm, this restored sense of self. You did not imagine the shift. It is real. And it is preparing you for the truth that is about to rise, the awakening that is about to occur, and the life that is finally ready to meet you where you stand. There comes a moment when the soul awakens not through comfort, but through fear of loss. This is where your soulmate now stands. The shift you felt did not go unnoticed by them. It reached them before words ever could. Something in their spirit recognized the distance not as punishment, but as consequence. And that realization shook them awake. They began to sense that you were no longer waiting in the same way. Not withdrawn in anger, not closed in bitterness, but settled. They calm unsettled them more than confrontation ever could have. Because calm meant you were no longer tethered to uncertainty. Calm meant you were no longer anchored to their hesitation. Calm meant the door they assumed would remain open forever might now close quietly without drama. Fear rose in them, sharp and undeniable. Not the shallow fear of being alone, but the deeper fear of losing alignment. Losing something sacred they once touched but did not fully claim. They remembered how it felt to be seen by you without performance. How it felt to be understood without explanation. That memory began to ache. Regret followed quickly. Not regret born of shame, but regret born of clarity. They saw how fear had dressed itself with logic. How delay had disguised itself as wisdom. How silence had pretended to be patience. Those disguises no longer worked. The truth stood plainly before them, and it was heavy. They revisited moments they once minimized. Times you reached out energetically. Times you waited longer than you should have. Times you softened yourself so they would not feel pressured. Each memory now carrying weight. They realized how much grace you extended without ever naming it. And with that realization came grief. They felt the panic of being too late, of having misjudged timing, of assuming access without stewardship. That panic did not immediately make them brave. At first, it made them restless. Sleep was interrupted. Distraction lost its effectiveness. Their inner world grew loud with questions they could no longer avoid. They wondered if you had already moved on emotionally. Not to someone else, but to yourself. That possibility frightened them more than competition ever could. because they knew they could not replicate what you brought into their life. You were not interchangeable. You were catalytic. They felt exposed. The mask they wore to manage appearances slipped. They could no longer pretend neutrality. The truth was demanding response. And for the first time, they understood that not choosing is still a choice, and that choice carries consequence. This awakening did not come with confidence. It came with trembling, with a realization that growth cannot be postponed indefinitely. The destiny does not wait forever for readiness. That alignment requires courage at the exact moment fear is loudest. They began to feel the weight of accountability, not because you demanded it, but because truth does. They recognized that if they reached for you now, it could not be with half-truths or delays. It would require vulnerability they had long avoided. It would require becoming someone new. They also felt shame, but hear this carefully. Shame is not meant to drive the story forward. It is meant to be acknowledged and released. What matters is that awareness has arrived. Awareness changes posture. Awareness creates movement. They are standing at the edge of decision now, aware that whatever happens next will define them more than anything before. The fear of losing you has stripped away the illusions they once hid behind. They see clearly that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. Whether they step forward immediately or wrestle longer with themselves, something irreversible has occurred. They can no longer unknow what they know. They can no longer pretend the connection was casual. They can no longer ignore the role you play in their becoming. And I want you to understand something important. Their awakening is not your responsibility to manage. You do not need to wait anxiously for their movement. You do not need to prepare yourself for disappointment. This awakening is theirs to navigate, and its outcome will be shaped by their willingness to grow, not by your endurance. You have already done your part. By healing, by releasing, by choosing alignment over attachment. That choice created the very fear that woke them up. Not fear rooted in manipulation, but fear rooted in truth. Stay grounded now. Do not let their awakening pull you back into uncertainty. Observe without abandoning yourself. Whatever unfolds from here will unfold in clarity, not confusion. And that alone is evidence that the breaking has done its work. What is meant to meet you will not require you to fracture again. It will meet you whole. I need you to see something now that you could not see then. Even while you were breaking, even while you felt empty and unsure of who you were becoming, you were still the key. Not because you were strong in the way the world defines strength, but because your spirit remained open when it would have been easier to close. That openness shaped outcomes you will never fully trace back to yourself. Your prayers mattered more than you realized. Even the ones you whispered through tears. Even the ones that sounded more like sighs than sentences. You thought prayer required clarity. I received surrender. You thought you had nothing left to offer. I was working with your willingness alone. I was enough. Your presence shifted rooms even when you said very little. Energy listens before words do. When you walked into spaces while wounded but honest, something recalibrated. People felt it and could not explain it. Situations softened without announcement. Resistance weakened without confrontation. You did not orchestrate this. You embodied it. The breaking stripped you of performance, and in doing so, it revealed your authority. You were no longer trying to be understood. You were no longer negotiating your worth. You were simply existing in truth, and truth carries weight. That weight altered timelines. There were moments when outcomes could have gone very differently if you had reacted from pain instead of restraint. If you had spoken too soon. If you had defended yourself aggressively. If you had tried to control perception. Your silence, chosen not out of fear but out of fatigue, created space for truth to surface on its own. That space changed everything. You thought you were inactive. You were anchoring. You thought you were falling behind. You were holding the line. You thought you were losing influence. You were actually removing distortion so influence could return cleanly. The breaking refined your discernment. You stopped forcing alignment and started recognizing it. You stopped chasing reassurance and started trusting resonance. That shift allowed you to step out of cycles that once drained you. Cycles that depended on your overfunctioning could not survive once you stopped supplying excess effort. Your compassion also played a role. You did not harden in response to disappointment. You did not retaliate when you were misunderstood. You allowed yourself to feel without becoming cruel. That restraint preserved your heart. That kept bitterness from taking root, and that preservation matters more than you know. You influenced destiny by choosing integrity when no one was watching, by choosing rest when proving yourself would have been easier, by choosing honesty with yourself instead of denial. Those choices recalibrated the path ahead, not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. I know it feels strange to be told you were powerful while you felt weak. But power is not always loud. Sometimes it is the refusal to abandon yourself in order to be chosen. Sometimes it is staying soft in a season that tempts you to close. Sometimes it is trusting me enough to stop striving. The life ahead of you requires this version of you. The one who knows how to pause. The one who knows how to listen. The one who does not confuse intensity with intimacy. That version was formed in the breaking, not despite it. Do not minimize what you lived through. Do not dismiss the season as a detour. It was training in stillness. It was refinement in presence. It was preparation for alignment that will no longer demand you disappear to make it work. You were the key even when you felt like the problem. And now that you are whole enough to stand without forcing anything, the doors that open next will do so because they recognize you. Not the version who endured everything, but the version who emerged with clarity. Stay steady. The final reversal is near, and it will confirm what I am telling you now. Watch closely now, my child, because this is where the story turns in a way you could never have engineered. What almost destroyed you is losing its power, not by force, but by reversal. The very pressure that cracked you open is being repurposed to carry you forward. Nothing about this is accidental. Pain does not get the final word. Purpose does. You thought the breaking disqualified you. Instead, it positioned you. What once strained you is now behind you, unable to follow where you are going. The weight that bent your knees has become the ground beneath your feet. You are standing where you once collapsed, and the ground is solid now because you are no longer standing in illusion. Circumstances that once felt threatening begin to dissolve without explanation. Conversations you feared never need to happen. Doors you thought were permanently closed reopen quietly, or better ones appear that make the old ones irrelevant. This is how reversal works. It does not always restore what was lost. It replaces it with what was always meant to be. You may notice that the same situations no longer trigger the same response in you. The fear is gone. The urgency is gone. The need to prove yourself has faded. That is not apathy. That is authority. When something no longer has the power to destabilize you, it has already lost. Those who underestimated you during your breaking will be confused by your steadiness now. Not because you are louder or more assertive, but because you are no longer reactive. Your peace speaks before your words ever do. It signals that you are no longer available for dynamics that rely on your self-doubt. What once felt like danger now feels like distance. Distance creates perspective. Perspective reveals how close you were to being consumed by something that was never meant to define you. I did not let it finish its work. I interrupted it at the exact moment it would have crossed from refining you into harming you. Blessing begins to show up in unexpected forms. Ease where there was strain. Support where there was isolation. Opportunities that align with your values instead of testing them. You may be tempted to question whether you deserve this after so much difficulty. Release that thought. Grace does not arrive as a reward for suffering. It arrives because suffering has completed its assignment. You are no longer living in reaction to what happened. You are responding to what is possible. That shift changes everything. Your choices come from clarity instead of fear. Your yes carries intention. Your no carries peace. You are no longer negotiating with yourself. This reversal is also internal. You trust yourself again. You believe your intuition without second guessing. You listen to your body. You honor your limits. These are not small changes. They are foundational. They ensure that what almost broke you will never have access to you again. Do not be surprised if gratitude rises alongside grief. Both can coexist. You can mourn what you lost while appreciating what it protected you from. You can acknowledge the pain without wishing you had stayed the same. The reversal does not erase memory. It redeems it. You are entering a life where stability is normal, not suspicious. Where joy does not require collapse to follow it. Where connection does not demand self-abandonment. This is not temporary relief. This is recalibration. Hold this truth gently. You did not survive for nothing. You were not spared just to return to the same patterns. What almost destroyed you has completed its work and has no further claim on you. Lift your eyes now. The final chapter is opening, and it will not ask you to bleed to prove you belong. Come with me now into the life that could only open after everything else fell away. This is not a reward for surviving. This is not compensation for pain. This is alignment. This is the natural result of becoming honest with yourself, of letting the breaking finish its work instead of resisting it. The life ahead of you is quieter, but it is deeper. It is steadier, but it is truer. You will notice that you no longer wake up bracing for the day. Anticipation replaces dread. Curiosity replaces anxiety. You do not need to rehearse who you are before you enter a room. You arrive as yourself, unedited, and that is enough. The life you are stepping into does not require armor. It responds to authenticity. Peace becomes your default instead of something you have to fight for. Not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer internally divided. You trust your inner yes and your inner no. You no longer betray yourself to preserve connection. This alone changes everything that comes near you. Love in this new life feels different. It does not rush you. It does not confuse you. It does not ask you to abandon your center, to keep it alive. Whether it arrives through the soulmate awakening you have sensed, or through new expressions you could not have imagined before, it will recognize you as you are now, not as you were when you were still breaking. You will be surprised by how much energy you have when you are no longer leaking it into misalignment. Creativity returns. Laughter returns. Desire returns. Not the frantic kind, but the grounded kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you value. You begin to build instead of recover. Stability no longer feels boring. It feels safe. Predictability no longer feels like a trap. It feels like trust. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy and chaos with passion. You choose what nourishes you, and you no longer apologize for that choice. Your past no longer defines your expectations. You do not assume loss is inevitable. You do not wait for the other shoe to drop. You understand now that breaking was not your natural state. It was a passage, and you have passed through it. There will be moments when you look back and feel tenderness for who you were. Not shame, not regret, gratitude. You will honor that version of yourself for getting you here without knowing how the story would turn out. You will see how brave you were even when you felt afraid, how faithful you were even when you felt empty. The life ahead of you is not loud about its blessings. It is consistent, is honest, is genuine. You will experience joy that does not require explanation and success that does not require self-sacrifice. You will rest without guilt. You will say no without fear. You will say yes without hesitation. And when challenges do come, you will meet them from a place of wholeness instead of survival. You will not fracture to handle them. You will respond with clarity. The breaking taught you how to stay with yourself. That is a skill you will carry forever. This is the life that needed you to break in that exact way. Not because you were insufficient, but because you were ready to shed what no longer fit. You could not bring the old weight with you. You could not enter this chapter while still negotiating your worth. Stand here now and feel the ground beneath you. This is not temporary. This is not fragile. This is the beginning that only comes after a true ending. You are not rebuilding the old life. You are living a new one. I am with you in it. I was with you in the breaking, and I will be with you in every ordinary, beautiful moment that follows. You are safe now. You are aligned, and the life ahead of you knows your name. Stay with me just a little longer, my child, because I want to seal this moment gently, the way morning seals a night without erasing what it carried. You have crossed a threshold, and I do not want you to rush past it without recognizing what has truly changed. This is not simply the end of a hard season. This is the realignment of your destiny with who you have finally allowed yourself to become. The life ahead of you will feel unfamiliar at first, not because it is wrong, but because it does not demand pain as proof of depth. You have been conditioned to associate meaning with struggle, connection with sacrifice, growth with exhaustion. This new life will challenge that conditioning. It will ask you to receive without flinching, to be loved without overfunctioning, to succeed without abandoning yourself. It may feel strange before it feels natural. There will be moments when your old reflexes try to resurface, moments when you instinctively brace, over-explain, or prepare for loss. When that happens, pause. Breathe. Remind yourself that you are no longer living in reaction. You are living in response. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. The action is fear-based. Response is rooted in truth. You will notice how differently you move now. Your decisions come with less noise. Your boundaries form without anger. Your intuition speaks without shouting. You are no longer chasing confirmation. You are recognizing alignment. This is what maturity feels like in the spirit. Quiet, grounded, certain. If your soulmate is meant to walk beside you in this chapter, they will meet you here, not in the chaos you survive it, but in the clarity you earn. They will not require you to fracture again to feel close. And if the connection transforms in a different way, know this: nothing real was lost. What was not aligned could not follow you. What is aligned will recognize you without struggle. I want you to release the belief that the breaking made you behind. It did not delay you. It recalibrated you. You are not catching up. You are arriving exactly on time, with a depth you could not have accessed any other way. The life ahead of you needed that depth. It needed your tenderness intact and your discernment sharp. It needed you whole. There will be blessings that arrive quietly, moments of peace that do not announce themselves, ordinary days that feel sacred because you are no longer at war with yourself. Do not overlook those moments. That is what answered prayer often looks like. Not fireworks, but rest. You may feel called to share this message with someone who is still in the middle of their breaking, someone who believes the collapse means they are finished. If you sense that nudge, honor it. Let these words travel where they are needed. And if you feel led to stay connected to this space of truth and reassurance, allow yourself to subscribe as an act of alignment, not obligation. In this final moment, type the words "I am ready" in the comments, not for anyone else, but as a declaration to yourself that you will no longer fear what is opening before you. I am proud of you, not for surviving, but for staying honest when it would have been easier to harden. I am proud of you for letting the breaking do its work instead of forcing yourself to return to a version of life that could not hold you anymore. Go now into this next chapter with gentleness. Do not rush to define it. Let it reveal itself day by day. I am not stepping away from you now that things are lighter. I am walking with you into the ordinary beauty you once prayed for without knowing how to ask. The life you are about to live is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is built on truth. And it knows exactly why you had to break the way you did.